Live. And the robots are recording us. Over to you, Adrian.
Okay. So hey, everyone. Thanks so much for joining our first and very impromptu video webinar. We apologize for all the late notice, but we want to ensure everyone's safety, but we still want to have great content. So we also saw this kind of as an opportunity to get familiar with this format in case we want to do this again for the future meeting, for any future meetings, or just other content we might want to do. So tonight is all about networking, specifically at game development related shows and conferences, such as the Game Developers Conference, as well as some other smaller events that we'd like to shine a light on tonight because GDC is not always the most accessible show. We have a small panel here tonight consisting of your IGDA board, as well as Dave Martirana from Flyclops Games. First, though, I want to do a quick introduction to the IGDA. My name is Adrian Sandoval. I'm the chair of the Philadelphia chapter. International Game Developers Association, we're a global advocacy network for game developers. Our mission, as per the IGDA website, is to support and empower game developers around the world in achieving fulfilling and sustaining careers. If you want more information on IGDA and on such as becoming a member, please check out igda.org. We hold our meetings, such as today's, on every second Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. Just check our social media channels, which are posted on there, for more information about all of our different meetings and events. We also have a code of conduct that we're posting to the chat so that you'll be able to review it. But just in general, please be sure to respect the space, both physical and digital, on all the folks here at the meeting. So to kick off the panel, I'm going to talk a little bit about my own show experience, so from when I was a student to becoming a professional, and yeah, so let's get started. So I've been designing games professionally now for about a decade, and in basically that same amount of time, I've both been a member of the IGDA and I've been attending the Game Developers Conference. At my first Game Developers Conference in 2007, that's actually where I attended my first IGDA meetup, because they do one annually there every year. And I met Bronwyn Tilwith there, who was a member of the Philadelphia IGDA back then. And she was also a GDC conference associate, which is what they call the volunteers there that you see wearing the brightly colored shirts. They badge the panels, and they're just happy to be there and giving information to everyone they can about the show. So Bronwyn introduced me both to our local IGDA chapter. She recommended me and fellow board member Karen McKenna to the volunteer program, which is how we've become members there. We've been members ever since. CA program is also where I met former Philly IGDA chair Grant Schunkwilder. Recently, I actually met the group that I'm working on my current game with. So it's really safe to say that most of my major contacts have been from through the IGDA, through GDC, and going to other consumer shows such as MagFest. I found really great networking opportunities, both showing my games and just being there as an event attendee. So I'd like to share some of that stuff with you tonight. So yeah, that's about me. I'm gonna now pass it over to our guest star, Dave.
Hey everybody, I'm Dave Martirana. It's nice to be quarantined here with all of you. I am one of the owners of Flyclops, a small game studio in Old City, Philadelphia. We have 8 people. We've been in business for 8 years. It came about sort of haphazardly, a bunch of friends who all work together at the Indie Hall co-working space. We all had day jobs and wanted to play around and make stuff at night, and we made a Domino's game. It was the first one on the App Store, the first one on the Google Play Store 8 years ago. It hit a niche that needed some love. We're still the top Domino's turn-based asynchronous and real-time multiplayer game on the App Store, and it is still our primary product. We have built a couple other products, and we're currently in the process of it's year 3, but we're in the process of building our first non sort of card-based async game that we hope to launch later this year. One of my primary focuses is relationship management and networking, and we don't, because of the way that we distribute games to the app stores, we don't have a lot of direct clients. So all of the relationships that we manage are partners in distributing our game and very specifically in how we make money and are able to keep a studio open and running. So I'm looking forward to answering questions about any of that stuff. Thanks for having me.
Hi, I'm Karen McKenna, and my cat seems to want to make an appearance. I'm a indie game developer with Island Officials. I'm an animator. I'm currently working on a game called Grumble. I have been a GDC conference associate for 11 years, I think. And I've shown games at various shows over the years. That's pretty much it.
I'll go next. Hi, I'm Rob Lloyd. Looking at the visitor list, I suspect almost all of you know me. Oh, but I see Sean in there too. Hey, thanks for being here, everybody. I have been going to various shows, whether it be GDC, IAPA for themed entertainment, American Association of Museums, and lots of other different conferences for about a decade or so, lots and lots and lots of these shows. And I've run shows, I've visited just as an attendee, I've gone as silent running with no real intention of talking to anybody, and I've gone both barrels blazing, trying to make as many contacts as possible and coming home and connecting on LinkedIn. In all of that, and including all the things that I've done at GDC, which is never nearly enough. I haven't been to things like PAX and the like, so I'm excited to hear from the other speakers about the other show experiences. And I definitely have thoughts about networking and how to do those cold contacts and the like. So that's me, and I'm gonna pass you over to Phil. Let's go to Phil.
Hey everybody, I'm Phil. I've been a professional software developer for the past 6 years. In that time, I've gone to multiple developer conferences every year, both as an attendee and someone working to represent companies at tables. The past 2 years, I've doubled down on going to mostly game-focused conferences and convention, and until some recent events, I had planned a convention a month for this year. So yeah, here to talk about my experiences with all that.
Okay, cool. All right, so now I'm over here. Hi. So I think that's everyone who's going to be chatting tonight. So to get us kicked off, I want to talk a little bit about prepping for going to conferences. So number one thing is making sure that you have a website ready to go. You want to have your portfolio, your resume, and your business card. You want to have all of these things so that you can prepare for whoever you're chatting with. And all of those are very specific skill sets, but I think that they're all pretty much at this point, websites are very affordable. There are really good options for doing business cards, such as Vistaprint. What's the other one that we usually use?
I wouldn't recommend them anymore.
Oh, okay. No. Vistaprint's still a good one and relatively cheap still. I'm currently using Wix.com to host my website, which if you want to take a look at it is adriansandoval.net. I don't know if that's necessarily the most affordable options, but like WordPress, even if you just have like a simple WordPress site using their free options, just as long as you have something so that after the show is done, people can take a look at you. Those are all utterly important. I can't really stress enough that those 4 things are things that you need. That being said, I do want to open up to the panel for any like specific advice that they have for prepping either your website, your portfolio, or your business card.
Business cards, number one thing is make sure they have a space on them to write. It's so easy to not remember where you got this weird card. And it's a common mistake of people new to making cards is to not leave that space to have a note on it. So that's my number one thing.
So one of the things that was nice last year was before GDC, I got business cards from Moo, and in that case included just like a picture of myself on it, so that when you're looking at your cards later for all the people you met, you can have a little reference to be like, oh yeah, this was like that person. So tons of times where I've gotten business cards and I was like, oh yeah, who was this again? Like, and then I'd like look them up on LinkedIn and find them all that way. Yeah, just having a little picture on there can help give someone a reference when they're trying to remember who they're talking to later.
The second, what Phil said, we do the same thing with our cards. We actually chose sort of comical pictures of ourselves. We find that not only does it give it that reference point, but it's also a good conversation starter. If you're not very good at it, you don't really have a way of like opening up a conversation with somebody, they will ask you about the picture on your card if it's, you know, something a little bit fun.
We have a question about business cards, about aspects that stick out to you in a good way. And are there fonts that we should avoid, like wingdings?
I'd say they stay away from too much information. I'm not a fan of cards that have 12 different phone numbers and 3 different email addresses. Our cards are very concise and to the point. It has our email address and our name, and that's it. Actually, I think the name of our company might be on there too. But like, that's it, because it's the best way to get in touch with us, and it doesn't overload people with information, and it's very concise and to the point and simple for them to remember.
I actually have my card right here. Here's the white space. Oh, you can't really see it on the camera.
Let's see if it focuses better.
I don't know if it's gonna happen. But basically I have my name, what I do, a little cartoon picture of me, and then my contact information. And then on the other side, since I'm an artist, I have a little handheld portfolio here. So it's got like 4 different games I've worked on, different artwork.
Yeah, I think that's, pretty much all the basics are just hit there. And it is okay, I think, especially if you're starting out as a student, to have, Karen's business card here, and she's a professional, but even aside from just saying illustration, animation, it says Pictomancer on there. So having like a cute title for yourself is it can be effective. Sometimes it's like people go a little overboard with that, but if you have like 1 or 2 things that can like open up a conversation. Mine currently, if you go on my Twitter page, even it says that I'm a cake enthusiast. I have that on my card, and it's always been a really great way of starting a dialogue with people. They tend to be like really big fans of that. So yeah, absolutely. I think absolutely all of these pieces here are some really great advice. Before we open up to other questions, any other comments on business cards?
Yeah, one thing that has stuck out to me in a bad way is oddly dimensioned business cards. Most business cards like will give you a little box like, oh, a place for other business cards, or like you can put them into a wallet. But if you get one that's like a really big square, it doesn't fit right and it just kind of becomes annoying. And that's always stuck out to me as like, I will throw this away because it's going to be annoying in my pocket all day long.
I was just going to say that I was successful for a number of years with a square business card. Now, this isn't mine. This is the card of a recent graduate from Drexel. What I wish I had, I was just looking in my drawers trying to see if I could have had a copy of it. It had a very bold, distinctive copy of our logo on one side. And that I would start conversations with people that I had talked to in a previous year at a previous show, and they'd sort of have that 1,000-yard stare on their face until I showed them my card again, and they looked at the logo and went, oh, and it all come flooding back to them. So sometimes it is a risk. I agree with Phil. There will be people you will tick off by having unusual formats or doing unusual weird things with it. So it is a risk. But sometimes having something that's odd, like Adrian's cake connoisseur or whatever, these kind of things can stand out. I ran into somebody at SIGGRAPH, and this was their card. This is too much. This is a bad idea. So have a postcard if you really want to and you want to have it, but treat it as a postcard. Have a real card as well. But you should have them. I think the last thing I would say about cards is have them with you always. I have some of my Drexel cards in my wallet right now. You will get in a random conversation in a random place. And the card should give somebody a way to remember you and a way to get to you once you walk away from them. And you could turn a random exchange in the subway into a business meeting later on if you have that card with you, because otherwise, how are they going to remember? So we do have another question in the queue about resumes. Oh, shall we move to resumes for a moment?
I was seeing that question and I did want to address it, so I'm good to move to resumes unless like someone really wants to.
And we're not
jump in
going to
about
go
business
into
cards.
what a resume should be. It's a matter of whether you should carry a resume. And let me start by saying, just because we were just talking about cards, you can actually make your business card a mini or micro resume for yourself. And just by having a couple of key bullet points of the things you can do or the things you're capable of. I love what Karen does by having the art samples on it. So to me, that's what you should carry. I would not carry a printout of your full letter-sized resume, but that's my feel. Anyone else?
So on that, my feeling on this is, one, it depends on the show that you're going to. I think that a physical resume at GDC is a good thing to still have. I do think keeping it on a jump drive is even better. If you can even like have a jump drive that has like your business card information like on the jump drive is also a really cool thing I've seen some people doing. That being said, the resume is great, especially if like the place you're going has a job fair or a career pavilion where you can talk to people whose job it is to look at resumes. We haven't jumped into like straight networking yet, but please, please, please don't hand physical versions or maybe even digital versions of your resume to people that you are chatting with who are not like necessarily directly responsible for hiring purposes. I will hammer the point a lot harder later, but the primary goal of networking is to make friends, and you will be nobody's friend if you're just passing resumes to people left and right. Does anyone else want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I agree that like if you're just kind of going up to any stranger and giving them your resume, it's not the best idea. But I've worked at a bunch of events where we were specifically trying to like being there to try to hire. It happens a lot of like developer specific events in Philly, just like for software. And if you're going up to a table where you know they're there to try to hire, it can be really great to give a physical resume because it's a lot harder to like have somebody lose something physical you gave them as opposed to like letting an email kind of like slip through the noise of it all. Yeah, it's just like harder to kind of like slip through the cracks when someone's meeting a lot of people and they're trying to hire, if you can actually give them like a physical token that they have to remember later on.
Yeah, in the later years of now when I go to shows, and when I was going to them hardcore, before I joined faculty, I just stopped. I didn't want to get swag or material from anybody because it was just going to become landfill when I got back to my office. And so I was going more and more towards digitally. And there were some people, I didn't want their card. I would just take a picture of their badge, and that was enough. So as long as I had that information. There was a time when card scanners were useful, and Square cards aren't good for card scanners, because then you could turn the 300, I came back from one trade show, an IAPA one year, and I had 300 contacts that I had made. that's a lot to convert into, that's a lot of cards to scan and a lot of things to do manually. So it's just a matter of keeping it efficient and letting people receive your information in the way they're comfortable with. If they don't want something physical, then you should be prepared to hand them something digital, or give them a way that they can follow up with that, or get their email and send it to them. So, I think this is a nice segue to sort of go to sort of general networking. If somebody wants to open up that, because I don't see a new question in there, but I will post anybody of our almost 30 attendees. If you've got a question, put it in the Q&A window and we'll get to it next. But do we want to go to networking yet, or should we stay? We haven't really even talked about shows and the different types of shows. Maybe we should go there before we get totally distracted on networking. Adrian?
Yeah. So different types of shows is, I think, a really good topic to talk about, especially in this kind of weird state that we're in right now, where like when we came up with this idea for this panel, the idea was we wanted to be GDC adjacent. We knew some people from the community, it was going to be their first time going to GDC. We knew a lot of people who weren't going to GDC because of cost prohibitiveness, and now none of us are going to GDC. So I think that like talking not just about like what to do at a developer related show, but also just any show that's in your area, or the other alternatives that are around is just generally a good thing to talk about. So you have developer focused shows, which are, GDC is a business conference. Sometimes it doesn't seem that way because like the level of press that it gets now is so big. But the primary goal of it is for people who are working in the industry to meet with each other and to get information from each other and to learn things. It's why they have like the seminars and lectures that they do. Now we're starting to see a lot of unconferences pop around, which are events that are like a little bit more off the cuff or impromptu, where people create their own like conversations and talks. GDC usually has alternative ones out on the lawn. Phil told me about a great one today called Bar Camp, which is local to the area. Philly has done one called Game Loop, which was a Boston thing initially in the past. And then you have like consumer shows, which I think is the one that a lot of you are probably familiar with, which include things like PAX or MagFest, which are, the focus is for people who play games and not so much people who make games. But now we're seeing a lot of crossover, being that so many people have free access to things like Unity, or do things like make music or video editing and things that are game development adjacent. So there's still like great opportunity that can be had there. Those are a lot of the alternatives that I know about. Did I get them?
that there are, especially for us, we find that the tend to fall into like one of two categories, or a crossover of those things. There are game focused conferences. We find that we talked about Unite that Unity puts on, that's sort of like game development focused. There's GDC, which is sort of moving into that business arena, and it has like a game development focused track, but it is primarily a business focused conference. And then we have things like Casual Connect, which is it's a conference that is specifically focused on the business of casual games. So it's good to go to a broad spectrum of things that not only cover like the development of games, which is something that, it really helps to be around your peers in that environment, but also making sure that you find whatever business you end up in with your games, that you find out a conference that really focuses on the business aspects of wherever you end up.
Yeah, I definitely agree too that like getting a large variety, hitting a large variety is important. Kind of going back to what I was saying about consumer shows, I think there was kind of an outdated idea that consumer shows have no value for people who are in development. And I think that was true up until like maybe we'll say about 5 years ago, until like a lot of that crossover happened. But now like I recommend absolutely like hitting up the indie space at a lot of these places. And this is just for like general networking, not even talking about if you actually do get to show your game there, which we'll talk about later in the panel. But like even hitting that space and talking to the people who are working in those booths, you get valuable information that you can learn from them and things within reason. Keep in mind that they are there to sell and pitch their game. And another number one networking tip is that you should absolutely be genuine. So you should be genuinely interested in the game that they are pitching, but you still like are making connections and making friends with the folks in those areas, and you might actually be in the trenches with them. So I think, yeah, absolutely that like you can get a lot of success networking and making connections, even in places where you might not be thinking about it.
Yeah, I think that there are so many different shows from large to small, and very industry specific, and then fringe industries that I think it's worth expanding your scope beyond the obvious ones and finding opportunities that are more than just the obvious ones of GDC and whatnot. I've gone to a variety of industry specific shows that use the same skill set that a lot of the students at Drexel and UArts and more and all that are building these skill sets. These can be valuable to a lot of different industries. The Association of American Museums has always a massive contingent of people on the floor, on the expo floor, that are doing a lot of interactive digital media. They're there trying to sell to museums, but if a conference like that happened to be in your hometown or was convenient for you to get to, it's not a bad idea to go to a place like that and pitch your skill set to those companies. So I think you need to sort of be open to where your skill set might be valuable, and where you might be able to pitch. And, these are the kind of shows that companies in Philadelphia like Night Kitchen Interactive or Blue Cadet, things like that, they'll be going to these things. So, sometimes you're looking for something extremely game specific, but sometimes there's other opportunities that you can look at. So be curious and look for weird opportunities.
Question on the in the Q&A portion that I think is relevant to what we're talking about is specifically shows local to this area. So I mentioned, which Phil had brought up to me earlier, Barcamp Philly as like a good unconference to go to. Again, like for the consumer shows, MagFest, I think MagFest especially has a lot of really great development-oriented panels. They have a maker space and they do workshops, so you can meet people who are part of the same interest that you have there, which is really great. Again, like just talking to people around you that are interested in the same thing as you are opens up your network a great deal. There's also the East Coast Game Development Conference, which is like another one of the smaller alternatives to GDC. I've not personally been to that one, but that's like probably the closest game development business-oriented conference like GDC that is in our area. So I think that's a great alternative to look into.
It's in our area, but it's in North Carolina, right?
Yeah, it's East Coast.
East Coast, in our area,
right.
Not in Philly.
Right. And also otherwise, when we have our meeting, we do our meetings in person. Part of that is also so that you can network with the people around you. Same with Philly Game Mechanics as well. You absolutely should be going to all of the meetings because those small monthly meetups are just as important as the big shows.
Yeah, one conference I also wanted to point out was Too Many Games. It's a lot more consumer focused, but that's one of the larger actual like digital video game conventions that happens distinctly in the Philadelphia area. Also, PAX Unplugged happens in Philly. That's more analog game focused, but that's like distinctly right here. And then New York, although it's not like local to Philly, is a reasonable rail ride away, and that's where Unreal Engine has dev days. Unity has dev days unless it gets canceled. They have one coming up in April. So those are some close ones that like don't require staying overnight to attend, where you can get a lot of good networking opportunities and meet some developers that are at least reasonably close to the area.
Yeah, we've had multiple Drexel teams take projects to Too Many Games. So I recommend it as a really good maybe a starter show to get used to the idea. I think the costs are fairly low, and then travel costs are going to be lower. But it's been really good for a lot of Drexel student teams to take games there and get exposure and feedback to the public. PAX East in Boston, I think a couple of years ago, we had a student team go up there. Groundless was the project, and I think it was $1,800 just for the table. But over the few days, I forget how long the expo floor is open in PAX East, but they had almost 2,000 people play their game. And that's so incredibly valuable. So you have to, they had bake sales and they've got some additional funding here and there. And that's how they made that happen. So we have 3 other questions in the queue. Let's see. How much opportunity is there for networking at consumer shows? So I think you have to be selective and respectful at a consumer show, because the devs who are there to sell their project to the consumers. And if you were to suddenly take up all their time trying to get a job from them, they're not making money doing what they spent a lot of money to be there to do. So you have to be respectful about that. If they don't have time for you, get the exchange, get the information, and follow up with them after the show. But that said, actually Groundless, when they were at PAX East, they were there as seniors from Drexel. They got like 3 resumes handed to them. And it's like, sorry, we're not hiring. We're a senior team. We're not even being paid ourselves. So you never know where the opportunities are there. But I think you have to be more selective and definitely be respectful of the devs who have spent a lot of money to be there.
Yeah, I'm going to add on to that and just say that, again, the goal for networking is always to be making friends. It's not necessarily about looking for jobs, right? And consumer shows are such a great place now to make friends who are doing the same things that you're doing. One of the points I was going to bring up a little bit was that, you never know when someone is going to become somebody, right? Networking really is, again, like, you want to make friends who are going to like remember who you are later, so that when they have an opportunity down the road, they remember who you are and be like, hey, I know a person who might be good for that. Right? So when you're on the consumer floor, again, like, the goal should be making friends with other developers who are, are very much in the same situation as you. You can do that on the indie space by talking to the people who are making games down there and relate your own experience making games. You can do that when you go to a panel that's, again, relative to your interest. If you're a composer, go and you're at MagFest. Again, there are tons of panels that are just about people who compose games, and you can talk to other composers who are there for the panel. You can talk to the panelist afterward. But again, that goal is like making friends and not necessarily just giving them your resume. I would have your business card on you at a consumer show, but I would, again, only use it in those very specific circumstances that Rob is talking about. Either they have asked you for it, or that you just made a really deep connection. Again, the goal when giving out the business card is to be, hey, I really liked having this conversation with you, and I want to continue this conversation later, right? It's not about like, what can they do for you, right? It's about like, hey, this meant something to me, and I want to keep it, and I want to keep this connection going. And it will, and if it pays off later, great, but that shouldn't be the goal necessarily. And I think that's true of all networking, any place you go, but it is especially true for the consumer show.
Yeah, one thing I also like to do at consumer shows to make sure I don't try to like monopolize developers' time, but be able to establish like a connection is get their contact info if they have like cards and stuff like that, and then try to make a mental note of like something interesting from their game that I'm like genuinely curious about finding out more about, whether it be like a visual effect or some mechanic, and then like email them about it, because most of the people are like super passionate about what they're working on and willing to talk to you about it and willing to have an exchange. It just might not be like the best time to get into an in-depth like discussion of their implementation of something while they're trying to like, yeah, show off a game to as many people as possible.
I think we have a couple of questions I want to be able to get back to, but since we're sort of on the topic of networking and the challenges or the traps, of going up to somebody and say, "Hi, can you hire me?" That's the last thing that you want to do, unless somebody's standing under a sign saying, "I'm hiring people." That should not be the way you open the conversation. I find you may be nervous about reaching out to somebody to network, especially a cold contact. And if you don't have that entry point of what Phil and Adrian are talking about, of like, I see what you're doing, that's really cool, let's talk about that thing. If you don't have that gateway, or you have a very brief moment, then it's as much pressure as you feel making the ask. The person who's receiving that ask, there's pressure on them, from anything as little as, who is this gnat flying around me that's buzzing in my ear, this is annoying, to, oh, I feel bad, I'd like to help people, but I'm having something going on right now in my personal life, I do not have time for this, or what have you. So there's a burden on them receiving your request as much as it is difficult for you to make the request. And so I think you have to I always try to make it easy for somebody to disconnect, that it's low pressure on them. And so I feel, in general, if you don't have that nice gateway that Phil's talking about of, bonding over something cool that they're doing, which is a much better way if you've got the space to do that, then it's to go up to them and say, "Hi, I'm Rob Lloyd. I'm trying to get a job as a level designer in game development. Who do you think I should be talking to?" I really like the "who should I be talking to" approach. As a request, it doesn't work with everyone 100% of the time, but it's a really low pressure ask, because you're not making a direct request to talk to them. They can easily deflect you. They can easily say, "I don't know." Or they can point at some stranger in the corner and go talk to that guy over there. Just leave me alone. What you hope is that someday, at some point, somebody will say, "Oh, you should be talking to me because I'm looking for level designers. What can you do?" But I think it's about giving that person an easy, recognizing that the conversation could be equally, if not more, uncomfortable for the person you're approaching than it is just for you to make the approach.
Something to add to that, I think that if you're going up to somebody who's at a table or a booth at a conference, these people see a lot of people all day long, and especially business focused conferences, maybe there's a lot of people that are trying to figure out an angle, trying to figure out how to take advantage of people, and it's very easy to pick out somebody who's genuine from somebody who's not. So first and foremost, be genuine and be kind to the people that are there. They've been there for hours. They've talked to people that they did not want to have to talk to, and they've dealt with things they did not want to have to deal with. The other thing I would say is that, they're there to pitch a thing. And so even if they're hiring, they're there to pitch their company. And, so if you go up and you're looking for a job, you know, the kind of thing where you might say like, I'm looking to be, you know, to do level design or graphic design or whatever, but I'm interested in what your company does. I'm interested in the games that you make. You know, this is what caught my eye. This is what brought me over to your table, and engage them on the thing that they're there for. And they already know you're looking for a job. You got that out of the way right away. Be genuine and kind, and really engage them about the thing that they're for.
And to add to that, a lot of these relationships aren't immediate. Sometimes it's something that you build up over time, going to multiple shows. Maybe you strike up a conversation about someone's game, and you know, you have genuine interest in their game, and then maybe they're showing the game again the next year, and then you can be like, oh, I see, like, you know, this has progressed since the last time I saw it, and you can continue that conversation. And I've made a lot of connections that way, where it's just, you just express interest, and then they get to know you, and if you're not annoying, they like to talk to you. So just, you know, it's not always going to be, you know, you go to a show, you make a connection, you're best friends or anything like that. Sometimes it's, you just kind of get used to seeing people over and over again, and like, oh, I know that person.
Yeah, at some point I'm gonna do if PGM does one of their lightning talks, which is like a 7-minute talk. My plan is to do a conversation about how, like, I have a friend who, after a couple of years, had a couch for me, which I think is like a very common story. But that's what networking is, right? Like, you make a friend, and then like maybe like sometime down the road they'll remember that when you need help, and it's about helping each other in that way, which I think is kind of cool. I want to get to some of these questions because they're starting to build up on us. So first one I'm seeing, I'm just going to go like in sequential order, if that's okay. First one I'm seeing, they said that someone might not like a physical item. Instead, they might want something digital. Should I mass produce USB drives with a portfolio on it as a digital thing for them to refer to? If you can mass produce it, I think that's great. That might not be the most affordable option, but, you know, I mentioned earlier that like some people use them as business cards, which is great. If you can't afford it, I think, again, resumes and portfolios are especially good if there's like a career pavilion or a job fair that you're applying to. And the digital one is great because then you can just like load it on whatever computer they have there. I've seen that plenty of times at GDC. So, I think that is an absolutely great option, and it helps also save on paper.
Also websites. You know, if you have your website and your business card, you can direct someone there. They can look on their phone.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the scale and the connection. Again, when I was working large shows with thousands of attendees, if not tens of thousands of attendees, if I got a USB drive from each one of them, it's not going to happen. You know, I think you have it, and at a smaller show, you save them, right? Especially because there's going to be a cost associated with them. You save them for that particular interest, or you wait for somebody to say, oh, well, we don't have internet here. I'd love to see what you have. You know, is there something you can leave with me, right? So it becomes more of an on-demand thing. And I think I agree with Karen, you've got to be able to give them to a website, GitHub, itch.io, ArtStation, whatever. But I would also never count on the internet at the show. Internet at shows generally bites horribly. It's low bandwidth and everybody and their grandmother's on it simultaneously. So do not expect to go, oh, I'll just bring up my website on my phone and show them live. Have a complete copy of everything in your portfolio locally on your phone. And you can call that up with a moment's notice and be able to show it. I can't tell you the amount of times I have been just disappointed when the internet wasn't there when I needed it to be there. And so having it physically there on your mobile device is the best, especially if you've got a tablet or a larger phone device. Then in just a moment's notice, you can call that stuff up. So have it local on your machine. Do not count on a download. And I would save stuff like either cards or like the printed resumes or a thumb drive to on demand or on request. If they ask for it, or if they want it, then it's great to be prepared for it. But they may not want to be burdened with it, and they feel obligated, and then they just throw at your thumb drive that you spent bucks making. So I would save it for a request, but that's my feel. So we have more questions, unless there's other. Dave, or you got something?
I just wanted to say to your last point, that I think is really good, especially if you're going someplace and you are trying to, you want to get something out of somebody, whether it's a job or a business partnership or something. Everybody has their own idea of what the appropriate way to hand them information is, and they all think that theirs is the best way and anything else is stupid. So some people are going to want cards. Some people are going to want paper resumes. Some people are going to think paper resumes are stupid. Why would I take a paper resume? Some people are going to want to hand you a card, and it's your job to follow up with them. The more scenarios you're prepared for, and the more you can make it seem like that person's request is the most natural thing in the world, the better off you're going to be.
Okay, so the next question was asking, is there a place locally they can find employment without just starting your own business? So first of all, there's a new website out there called Grackle HQ, which is just about job postings, which I think is a great place to go. Second of all, there are game development areas in Philadelphia. Whether or not they're hiring is up to their discretion. So I'm not necessarily going to throw any names out there at the moment. I think most people are aware at this point what development houses are in Philadelphia. If they're hiring, they'll post about it. I think it's good to keep an eye out when you see those job postings. But for the most part, this is it's best to just come out to the community events like IGDA or PGM and just meet folks who are there. Some people you might meet who are working there, and again, it's about making connections and not necessarily just trying to find a job, but as long as you're meeting people and networking, at some point someone will help you out.
Yeah, you want to be the person that when a job opening comes up, they're like, I know that person would be perfect. You don't want to, if you just go asking for a job, you tend to annoy people. But if they have an opening and they know you, then they're going to come to you.
Yeah, that's definitely an incredible point that there are the local companies in this area, one of them at the very least, and we're not naming names, so I won't name names, but they don't really post. When they're looking, they use their network. They go to people they know and the people those people know. So you have to become known. You have to become friends with people and become a known entity. So that when that thing comes up, like Karen said, they think of you before they even post the ad, maybe. So, Phil, you were going to say something? I cut you off. Sorry.
Oh yeah, as far as finding jobs in Philly, before I got my current job in Philly in the games industry, had kind of given up myself on being able to find a game job in Philly because I was like, okay, there's so few companies. And the way it worked for me was I overheard somebody else asking my one current boss about jobs at a Philly Game Mechanics event, and what he was looking for, he was describing, I'm like, oh crap, I meet all those things he's saying are skills. So sometimes it's literally just being in the right place at the right time, overhearing a conversation. Because if I hadn't done that, I don't even know if I'd be in Philly right now.
So I want to add to that is I guess the question was, is there a place locally where we can find employment without starting our own business? All right. So again, I want to go back to what has been I said earlier about the skill sets that game developers have are applicable in a million different places. So while there may be only a couple of larger studios and larger indie studios, really. I mean, even the largest one is still under 30 employees at the moment. There are multiple companies in the Philadelphia region that use the skill set of a game developer, from some of the places I've already mentioned, Night Kitchen Interactive, Blue Cadet, Tipping Point Media up in near Allentown, and dozens dozens of other digital media houses that do different types of digital content creation, whether it's for pharmaceutical companies, wanting marketing stuff for things for trade shows, or, you know, a variety of other things. And then you've got little things popping up. You know, there's a publisher outside of, you know, up near Allentown, that mostly handled Twitter or Twitch talent, streaming talent, but now is doing some game publishing. So you just sort of have to become part of the conversation so you can start to hear about some of these opportunities, because there's no singular clearinghouse. But technically Philly, the news outlet, just had a networking job fair a week or two ago that had over 500 companies there. They were mostly looking for coders and front-end developer type things, but there are still, I had this conversation with somebody recently where they were promoting themselves as a 3D modeler and creating 3D visuals, but they were going to non-game companies, and they were finding that a lot of the job openings were listed as graphic designers or illustrators, but the skill sets were game development skill sets for 3D. Somebody in industry that has no knowledge of game development, when they think of, oh, I need pretty pictures, they just happen to be interactive 3D pretty pictures. The only thing they can think of, from their experience of who makes pretty pictures for me, oh, the graphic designers do. And so if they don't have anybody informed about game development in their company to write a better job description or job title, they might put up a job listing that is completely game development skill set, but they don't know how to label it. So again, it's part of being open and creative.
Yeah, game design, game dev definitely can be applicable to a lot of areas you might not be thinking about, which is cool. Really quick too, before I get to the next question, I'm just going to say that Phil posted a link to Variant VR, which are looking for VR modelers and Unity developers right now. So there's one avenue that we know actively is looking for jobs right now. Next question is asking, it's okay to ask permission to pitch, and then with the an example they posted is it okay if I share with you what I'm working on? So I feel like the question you're asking and the example you gave are two very different things. Asking someone if it's okay to share with what you're working on. So I'm very much about being an active listener. So listening more than chatting, let them talk about themselves more than chatting about what you're doing is usually a really good technique, because again, it's about building friends, and listening to what other people are doing and showing that you're listening is a great way to like make friends with someone. Sharing what you're working with is a great idea, especially if you're like talking to someone who's like already in industry, if it's like a celebrity or someone that you know of that you were like excited about their work, saying that, hey, I'm working on this thing and you've really inspired me in this way is a great way to bring them into the conversation while also mentioning with what you're working on. All of these things are very different from pitching. However, pitching specifically is about like saying, hey, I have this like great game idea, which I would actively say you do not want to do. That like puts this mind in the idea that you are an idea person, and like ideas are a dime a dozen in the game industry. Usually like game concepts are thought of by like groups of people, if they're not just like, you know, your shareholders saying this is the game you're making and you design around that. Pitching to people on the floor is just never a good idea. And again, like it's another really fast way to let people know that you're on the lookout for your own interests and are not interested in them, right? So I actively would discourage pitching, but talking what you're working on, as long as you can relate that back to the person you're talking to about the conversation you're having, I think that's absolutely fine. Anyone else have thoughts on the subject?
Yeah, I think they call it, in a lot of shows, they'll call it briefcasing. Or there was there might have been some other name for it. It's suddenly like briefcasing, but not. It's illegally trolling the show floor, trying to be a vendor at the show without actually having paid to be there as a vendor. And some shows will kick you out because of it. So there's an extreme level of pitching when you're not supposed to that can actually get you kicked out of a show. Yeah, no, if they don't want your pitch, don't harass them with it. It'll only go ugly. And yeah, nobody's going to hire an idea guy. They can get those ideas for free at the street corner or wherever. So
I see that Ryan put that it makes communication difficult. You know, I think that, I mean, yeah, all human interaction is difficult. I think that, you know, if you are genuine and you are genuinely interested in the person that you've approached and what it is that they're doing. I have not been to a conference where I don't and like talk with someone who then will naturally turn it around to like, and what are you doing, or and what are you working on, because you've given them the space to tell you whatever they need to tell you, and now they're actually interested in hearing what you might have to say. So conversation, especially at conferences, at shows, will naturally turn towards, you know, what it is that you're doing and why you're there, if you give them the space to talk about those same things about why they're there.
I've had so many conversations at different conferences over the years that were not on the show floor. They were not, you know, they were in line to get food. They were in line to pick up my badge. And, you know, don't be that person that scans the badge. And if the company name isn't exciting, you blow that person off. You know, be real and recognize that, especially if it's somebody who's younger, but even somebody who's older, is like, they might just be more introverted and not ready to have a conversation or start one on their own. But just go, you know, this is the nice thing about, oh, you're from Maryland, or, oh, that's a really cool pin, or, oh, yeah, I love that company, that the t-shirt you're wearing, you know, start a conversation, be a human being, and they'll probably be a human being back to you, you know, but if they don't want to, read that signal and move on, and don't be that person that clings too long.
Yeah, to what Rob was saying, just one of the things brought to my mind was just trying to like really read body language, because a lot of times someone really isn't feeling it. They're just trying to be polite. You're like, okay, and you see someone like kind of yeah, like fading out, or yeah, physically moving away is the thing. Try to like figure out how to pivot. Like, okay, like let's see if I can not rope, but like bring them back into the conversation, engage them, because it's clearly faltering at this point.
Get my mic back. Okay, so the next question up on the list is if we have other tricks to take pressure off potential employers. We did mention a couple of techniques earlier to like try and like, again, kind of engage people more about them and less about like, you know, what you're doing, and just like, and less about like, you know, this is the job I'm looking for. I mentioned the term active listening before. Active listening is like a technique, is a really great technique that is all about just showing the person that you are listening to what they're saying while still remaining a part of the conversation. This is when it's a great time to, if you are working on a thing that like relates to what they're talking about, relate your own experience, but also show that like, you know, using examples from what they said. Active listening is all about basically repeating back what you just heard, just to reconfirm to them that you're listening. Sometimes you'll see like some active listeners that take this like super literally, and they literally just repeat the exact same thing that you just said back to them. And like, you just like, which is always kind of like, feels kind of weird because it's like you have an echo, but like what they're doing is just letting you know that like, okay, I heard what you said. And if you can find ways to like show that you are listening to them and reaffirming that, like, again, it just goes a long way in showing that you are like you are engaged in the conversation, that you care about who they are and less about what you want. So that's one particular tip I have. Does anyone else have other tips out there, like not like to like kind of relieve pressure? There's also another question right after this about not aggravating the person too. And again, there, that word pitch is coming back up again. And we're re-emphasizing that fact that like, this is not about pitching. This is about, you know, making connections. That's the important part, not the pitch.
Yeah, I think Phil was saying about reading body language, and you know, you don't want to be apparently the loud talker that makes everybody's ears ring because my mic is too high or something like that. So, you got to, be sensitive to people's response to you, and again, be genuine, be human, be kind, and I mean, unless somebody has actually got a sign up, we're hiring, or they're in a job fair and people are queuing up to talk to them, then they may not actually be hiring. And so be a human being and don't put the pressure on them on that. But even if they are, even if they have a sign out saying we're hiring, or they are actually in a job fair and there's a whole queue and it's fully expected, you are trying to talk to them about a job, listen to what they're asking, and give them give them the conversation they're looking to have. Don't just sort of, you'll inevitably have some sort of a spiel or a pitch that you'll have for yourself, but don't give it so robotically that it's not the conversation they want to have at that point, and it's not actually helping them understand who you are. So
yeah, one thing when it comes to also just avoiding aggravating people with that, if you go into GDC Vault on YouTube, there are so many talks about specifically like pitching aside from networking. That's a great resource. I started watching a bunch of pitching videos, and I don't have any like intent to for a while, but there's still like just a super interesting study in like empirical psychology. Yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because it's a good resource where there's like tons of hours of people like, here's my actual experience from both the like publisher, recipient, and developer side for specifically actual like pitching aside from just networking.
yeah, I think in terms of actually pitching a game or a project that you're working on, if it's another dev, they're not a publisher. Why are you pitching their game to your game to them? It's more about talking about what they're doing and what you're doing. You're not trying to sell them your game because they're not in a position to buy your game. It's more about who are you? What can you do? What are you interested in? So a full-on pitch, and maybe that's not what the person was asking the question about. They were talking more about like network pitching of this is who I am. But if you get into pitching generally for devs means I'm trying to sell my idea to somebody who's going to give me money for my idea, for my project to develop it. I wouldn't pitch to somebody unless they want to hear your pitch. They've asked for it in some way. And made it clear. Otherwise, I think that's generally probably bad form to try to pitch a game idea to somebody who hasn't asked for it.
All right, cool. This next one's a very specific question. Currently working on my business card, would you recommend having my LinkedIn account on it, or is that self-explanatory? So my feeling on this is, we mentioned before, you don't want to clutter your business card up too much. Maybe if you don't have a website, you weren't able to get your own website done, then like your LinkedIn is great in a pinch. Or you just have some extra space, you want to throw it on there. There's nothing wrong with having it on there. But that being said, having your own website that then links to your LinkedIn is probably what I would say is best practice. If anyone has other thoughts or disagrees with me on that, then please go ahead.
I think my primary thing is give them one point of contact. You might give them on your card, you might give them your social tag where you're going to be on Insta or whatever. And then generally for personal branding purposes, that should be the same tag no matter what social they try to find you on. But in terms of websites, I give them one. Give them one website that is a clearinghouse for everything about you. Trying to give them multiple websites is a problem. If LinkedIn is your clearinghouse, great. If ArtStation is your clearinghouse, if your personal website is your clearinghouse, but one website, and the simplest one. And edit your LinkedIn account so that it gets rid of the gibberish at the end of it. Edit your account so that it's some unique name and not Rob Lloyd 74374-H, which whatever LinkedIn assigns you by default. Get rid of the gibberish.
Actually, I'll actually open a question up to Karen on that note, because I kind of want to get her input on this. So Rob mentioned having just the one website, be it your website or your ArtStation. From an artist perspective, would you like, if you had an ArtStation? I know you don't have an ArtStation currently, but if you had an ArtStation, would you put that on your business card along with your website, or would you just have like access to your ArtStation from the website? What's your personal view on that?
I think it depends on how good your website is. Like if you have an impressive website, then you can just link to all of your other content from there. If your website hasn't been updated in a while, but you post more frequently on ArtStation or wherever, you might want to put that on there and say you want to direct them to the content, wherever the content is. So if it's your personal site, if it's ArtStation or another site like that, just show them the content.
All right. So the last question we have currently queued up, but don't worry, I have other things I want to bring up and mention to chat about, though. Again, if you have questions, please feel free to throw them on the Q&A section. So question says, this is a tricky one, but it needs an honest answer, and I agree. How inclusive are game companies in general, in particular when it comes to neurodiversity? So I will say that, from my experience, I've really only worked for Island Officials, which has always been a very good company in terms of inclusiveness. So I don't have the most experience personally, like inside of companies. I can tell you, at least from outside projection, companies are talking a lot more about these things. They are generally starting to open up a lot more. Obviously, there's always so much more work needs to be done. And in particular, neurodiversity, I think, is one that does not get talked about nearly as often as some other initiatives that have been taking place. Again, I can't speak from personal experience inside of those game companies. I do know that we are in a much better place than we were 10 years ago. I also think that is, in a lot of ways, a small comfort. So that's kind of my take on it.
Couldn't unmute my mic. I have Discord up on the side here, and I was looking at IGDA's Discord, and through an organization like IGDA, there's a special interest group for allies, there's a special interest group for accessibility, and then there's various other cultural groups, Latinx, Jewish, LGBTQ, Muslims. I'm literally just going down the list here. They're beginning to open up spaces that are having these conversations. Sometimes those conversations are isolated and you're just preaching to the choir. But I do think it shows that there is a segment of the industry that is beginning to engage these questions. But I think there's a lot of Neanderthals out there. And so, you have to get to know them as much as they get to know you and try to get a feel for the flavor of that company and the culture of that company. I think gaming is as problematic as any other industry right now. But I think there's maybe a little extra problematic aspect of it. But I do know, and I take heart in seeing a lot of different individual movements towards having more inclusiveness, diversity, and accessibility. So I have hopes for the future, but until then, you really need to get as good a feel of the culture as best as you can when you have these conversations.
I think this, I'm sorry.
No,
I,
I saw the note pop up in the chat about, yeah, if the Neanderthal's the one that's doing the hiring, what do you do? And it's like, honestly, and I know this is, I have the same kind of response to people who are worried about engaging um, a company that's known for crunch or other problems within their company culture. It's a lot easier to say as somebody who is in a privileged situation, has a full-time gig, and I'm stable where I am, but that's a company you don't want to work for. And if enough people walk away from that company, then maybe some noise can start to change their direction. But I'm sorry, Dave, I cut you off.
no, not at all. It's fine. I think this kind of just gets back to what we've been discussing, which is, putting yourself out there, networking to make friends, and to sort of ingrain yourself in the community. And the more people you know that have, basically you're pulling you, the more you ingrain yourself in the community around this sort of thing, the more you have a shared pool of experiences to pull from. And so if you're kind of out there on your own, it's a lot harder to be able to navigate these waters. Whereas if if you have a group of people that that you trust in the community of the kind of work you want to do, you may be able to avoid some pitfalls or speed bumps where other people have already had those negative experiences.
So I'm gonna jump off there and jump to the next question, which is related, which is asking about pronouns and if you should inform potential employers what you identify with, and if by doing that you ruin your chances in the industry. So again, talking from a limited space of experience, I'm cis. I think everyone on the panel identifies as cis in some way. But that being said, like I can tell you from experience that I have folks who of all different gender identities currently in the industry. I definitely don't think it ruins your chances. But if we're being completely blunt and honest, does it make it harder? Yes, I was going to say a little bit, but it's really going to be up to your own experiences if you're doing networking. I think again, like it really jumps back to that whole networking thing. We have folks of all different gender identities and racial identities and all different kinds of backgrounds here in Philadelphia who are working. You should definitely be building up those communities as well. It's not just about like talking to people who are similar in terms of what they do in development, but also in terms of similar backgrounds as well. If you build up that support network, they will help you out. Again, I do think that although there is a slight level of privilege to it, I also think that Rob is absolutely right in saying that you need to find companies that are going to like fit who are comfortable with you and you are comfortable with. If you're not comfortable giving them your pronoun, or if they would see that as a potential turnoff, they are not the company for you. There are companies out there who are absolutely great with that. They do contract work with folks of different backgrounds. They absolutely exist. And again, I'm not saying that it's no more less or more difficult for you than it is for me, but I am saying that it is absolutely possible, and there are plenty of people out there who are proof to that.
I think it's important to identify people that are out there through social media that are speaking at conferences, and seeing their voices and the companies and projects that they lend their voices to, which become important signifiers that this is a company that is open-minded to humans and not just a very small subset of humans. And so you want to look for GDC panel talks where people like Bonnie Roberg and actually, there was going to be a really good panel at GDC with Bonnie and Lena Devanter from Australia. I forget the name of the panel, but these are really interesting voices that are doing a lot about inclusivity and the companies that they're going to talk about. And there's lots of different angles here, from Rami Ismail from the internationally cultural side to people like Bonnie, and then Adrian Shaw right here in Philadelphia. So look for the companies that they're talking about. Look to the people who they're having conversations with and where those people are working. And I don't think it's necessarily a whisper network. I think there is whisper networks for all of that, where these things are very quietly passed around on private networks. I think there's a lot of conversation that is out in the open right now. And you can look to those conversations and take pointers from companies that do or do not respond well to that. If a company is getting trashed on social media because of its character customization tools, and they're, you can't make everything perfect because we all have limited resources. But if a company responds to being challenged of that they're not being inclusive, judge their response to that. Is their response to that healthy or welcoming? Do they admit that they have limits, or do they come back and go, it's historically accurate that only white men were there? So I think there's a lot you can pick up from that. And so I think it's more than just a whisper network. I think there is quite a bit of a public network that's making this kind of stuff open.
So Rob mentioned too that IGDA has a lot of special interest groups. We'll try and get the link as soon as possible, but if the IGDA National Discord, they have a Discord channel for all of those special interest groups that Rob mentioned and more. And that is a really great way to, just on the internet, start building your network of folks with similar backgrounds to you. And this is not me like pitching for IGDA National. You don't need to be a paid member of IGDA to get on their Discord and to start talking in those groups. So that's just another route to start building those networks, albeit digitally. Again, there are folks in this area that are absolutely worth talking to. And just building that network, I think will absolutely help in trying to like start, entering the industry, no matter what background you're from. So that is it for the open questions. I think now we've been touching on general networking for a while, so I do want to like start talking a little bit right there. I'm gonna open with a tip that because I had a list of tips that I was going to go over tonight, so I'm going to get started with just one real quickly. When we're talking about conferences and shows, if you attend them, it is very important to be there. And I don't just mean like, obviously, like if you are not, if you go to a show and you just spend all your time in your hotel room, you're not going to be meeting people. But I'm not just specifically talking about just being at the show. I'm talking about being there as much as possible and making as much of an effective use of your time. I recently read a tip, that really good one that for GDC, is to try and get to the floor. So they usually start doing the panels around like 10 a.m. So try to be on the show floor at like 9 a.m. Because because there are only so many few early birds. I know no one wants to wake up early, but like if you are one of the few people who are there, if you're like one of the few people who are there, you're also one of the few people that are there for people to talk to as well. So it's just a really great tip to like, meet as many people and to get as much opportunity for folks that you might have otherwise missed, right? To just try and like maximize your time. So that's my first real big tip for when you're at a show and you're trying to do networking, is just, be there as much as possible. Other folks, general networking. Hey, Rob.
Wear comfortable shoes. Wear the most comfortable shoes you can. Use inserts. I sometimes would save the inserts. I'd wear comfortable shoes and I wouldn't put the inserts in until halfway through the day. Magically refreshing. Travel lightly. I'm a firm believer in picking up nothing at a show. Though I would at a SIGGRAPH stand in line for 2 hours so I could get my walking teapot from Pixar. But otherwise, beyond a Pixar walking teapot, I was not picking up anything. If it wasn't digital and I couldn't look at it at a website later, because then you're stuck, you go in, you're the first person there, you're there, and oh my gosh, this is great. And now you have 6 posters you have to carry around all day. And they're going to get trashed by the time you get back to your hotel room. So unless you have a strategy of I'm really there and I really want the swag and I really want the tchotchkes or the posters, and I'm going to go back to my hotel room that's only a couple minutes away or in the same hotel, I'm going to go back there and dump stuff off in a couple of hours. If you're going to be out for 8 hours and then you're going to a party later on, you do not want to have a bag full of posters. So travel light. Carry just your cards, a battery charger, a wall wart, the tiniest wall wart you can for your phone, and don't count on the internet. I'll just say that one more time.
This is a pretty strong one for me. If you're at a conference and you see somebody that you had a very good conversation with at a previous conference, you absolutely 100% must go up to them and say hello, whether or not it's like a quick, you don't even stop walking, you do the handshake, you acknowledge the other person. That is the way that you start to solidify relationships that got off the ground really well. But a lot of times, you have a good conversation with somebody at a conference in California and you live in, let's call it Philadelphia. And, you're not going to have much opportunity to see that person again. And then you do. And if you don't take advantage of that, it's one of those things that you'll never know what you missed out on, but make sure that you re-acknowledge them, whether or not it's a presenter or just another attendee or the janitor that you had a great conversation with. Make sure you sort of nurture those relationships that you've started.
Yeah, so one thing I want to touch on is at a lot of conferences and networking events, I get a ton of social anxiety. And one of the easiest fallbacks in modern society is to be like, oh, well, I'm alone and I feel weird. I can just take out my phone and it'll make me not seem like I'm just kind of standing there solo, but then you're avoiding kind of networking entirely. And one of the game changers I had was just realizing oh, if I just look for the other people who seem as anxious as I feel, and go talk to them, usually it'll be a pretty productive conversation because they really wanted somebody to kind of help them out of that anxiety as well. So just kind of, if you're feeling anxious, try to leverage it instead of just ignore it.
Yeah, I'm not an introvert, but my wife is a hardcore introvert. And it doesn't mean that, when she knows somebody, she's incredibly gregarious with them, but she has to get to that comfort point before she can be. But even still, being outside, being with other people, even if they're best friends, it's exhausting. And she's gone to conferences. She's a president of her writing chapter. She goes out to these things, and she used to head down, eyes on the phone and really try to avoid human contact. And then she would get home and realize that she had missed all these opportunities. And so she really had to sort of will herself into that situation of, I'm not running back to my hotel room. I'm going to stay out in the lobby and I'm going to look, Phil, that is look for the other quiet person, right? And just give them that opening, right? Somebody has to break that ice. And if you can be that person to break the ice, you might end up having an incredible conversation that you wouldn't have had otherwise. But it does. It becomes exhausting. When I go to a show, whether I'm working it, I'm running a booth, or I am just working the floor, I am on for 8 to 10 hours easy. And then I don't do anything at night. I get back to my hotel room and I think, oh, I should go to that party. But a switch just flips for me and I'm out. I'm dead. I'm not going out again for the night. So it is, even for somebody who doesn't consider themselves an introvert or have that kind of a challenge, it is an exhausting experience. I think you really, from the comfortable shoes to making these connections. I mean, Dave's comment about making sure you pick these things up year to year, show to show, that you're building these little connections over time, is that you also have to give yourself permission that you cannot do it all, that you have to allow yourself to get back and recharge. I think the last time probably my first conference ever was, what was the original D&D conference? I want to say Origins. I went to a D&D playing conference back in high school, and I didn't sleep for 5 days. I don't remember the flight home. Luckily, it was a nonstop, but I can't do that anymore, and I don't think it's a really healthy way to approach a con. So pace yourself. Give yourself permission to take it easy.
Yeah, to that point, also just like being introverted at conferences is sometimes like in this like mental trap of like, okay, I spent all this like money to get here, I spent all this time to get here, I'm feeling drained, I don't want to talk to people, but like if I don't just force myself through it right now, like I'm gonna miss out on the opportunity. And then it's like, okay, if you can give yourself like the freedom to take like 10 minutes, like okay, I'm just gonna like walk around the block. The amount of like recharge that can give you can like pay its own dividends. That trying to like force yourself through it would end up harming.
I think also this is a good point to start talking about another important subject, because I think we're touching on a lot of it too. I'm talking about like when you're on and off and you're introvert versus being an extrovert. So really popular part of going to GDC especially are all the parties around the conference, not even GDC itself, right? And there are parties from all these major companies, and there are tons of people worth meeting and worth knowing there. I'm not, and you know, for a lot of people, they're absolutely worth going to. And you can make a lot of really good connections that way, make a lot of really good friends in a comfortable environment. Someone mentioned gamer party the core of that being horrifying. And I will say that again, with GDC especially, the focus is that it's a business conference. And even though these parties are not especially treated like business parties, they're still like about like people who work in the industry or people who potentially want to work on the industry getting to know each other. So it's still not like people just playing games or talking about games. It's not really a gamer party, but it is still can be an uncomfortable atmosphere. And honestly, I am an introvert, and I've never really had a good, outside of the Bronwyn, who I mentioned earlier, parties are not where I get the best networking in. And being in a place that it's comfortable for you is also important, because you cannot be an effective networker if you are uncomfortable. That goes with, drinking versus not drinking. If you're not comfortable at a party where there is drinking, then please don't go to those parties. Personally, I have more experience, or I get better networking opportunities when I talk to people at panels, whether I'm talking to the people who are at the panel around me in the audience with me, or if I'm talking to the audience members themselves. As a volunteer, networking with my other and fellow volunteers, which, by the way, separate tip, volunteer for things. It's also a really great way to meet people. But just in general, like there are other better opportunities that are more, that might be more comfortable for you than parties or drinking events, and that is absolutely fine. There is a conventional wisdom that says always go to parties, and I will tell you 100% that is not true.
I'd like to second that. I actually enjoy the parties in part because they're usually pretty weird, and I will tell you, if you're at a party and you think that it's weird and uncomfortable, then most of the people around you probably also think it's weird and uncomfortable, and that's a nice introduction or a way to open up a conversation. I do like them for the ability to get that second handshake, to nod at somebody that you've met before, to kind of reinforce the relationships, but it is not the primary place to to strike up new relationships with people. It's a good way to unwind if you like that sort of thing, but it is to your point, it is absolutely not the primary way to start networking.
And it is also absolutely 100% not a dating party. You know, you want to make friends and network, great, you know, and hopefully you'll make friends and that will lead to great networking and all of that. But nobody goes to a conference to get a date. That's probably something that's rough to say as an absolute, because there's 8 billion people on the planet. But I would caution everyone to always be a professional. Always assume that when you're at anything related to a professional event, that you should be a professional at that point. And hitting on somebody is absolutely not professional. And so don't do that. But that's something where the parties, I think, can sometimes create this illusion that suddenly it's not a professional event and suddenly you can be that. It's like, no. I mean, some people are at these parties because they have to be, because their company is hosting the party or sponsoring it. So yeah, no, let's all be slightly more professional than that. And, you know, face it, that's the bulk of the responsibility of being a professional in that environment is on men, especially white men, to not go around going, hey baby, hey gamer girl, or whatever, because they're probably more professional than you and probably have more skills and experience. That's why they're there. They're professionals too. So yeah, no dating.
Sorry, I think we're all just really enjoying the chat right now. Yeah, no, absolutely great. And a lot of times too, there are people who go to the parties out of obligation. They feel like they have to go, not just because they work there, but again, like there's this common industry advice that I'm telling you is not true, which is that you have to go to these parties. So a lot of times you just find people there who are uncomfortable, just in general, and then like they get into all kinds of weird conversations. Going backward a little bit, but just talking about that idea of how you want to be there to make friends and connections. Karen and I had the really weird experience when we were first going to GDC that we were students. We were actively students, but we were also working on a professional game that was getting published for Nintendo DS. And it was weird being the situation where we would talk to students and the students would start asking us if like we could get them jobs because we were working on a DS game at the time. Which just put us, I guess it was a good way to learn what not to be, because we were already like as students put in that exhausting position of people asking us for jobs, which is, you know, is a terrible way to be. And also kind of a reminder too that like treat everyone equally. And I'm not just talking about diversity in this aspect, even though that also is a good point to treat everyone equally, but also when dealing with industry insiders or students. I said earlier, you never know when someone is going to become a somebody, which is absolutely true, which is why it's absolutely worth your time to talk to people who are students from other areas as well, and making those friendships, as it is to talk to an industry insider, even the big celebrities, as long as like, you know, you're not like just coming off as like total fan to them and you're talking about like their work in relation to your work, like all those connections are just as super valuable.
Also, and this comes, you know, more as you attend to these things and you get older and you've been in the industry for longer, but also just people who might strike up random conversations with you. It is a very awkward place to be, no matter how extroverted you are, and basic human empathy towards the people that might awkwardly engage you. You know, realizing that somebody that's asking you for a job without introducing themselves is, you know, probably just really wants a job, and doesn't know how to go about it. So I think that's, especially as you end up, in the industry for longer and more and you have more connections, just a little empathy towards people who are starting out fresh.
Yeah, one of the things that I have a colleague who doesn't teach at Drexel anymore, John Burton, but he's the source of the professional quote that I've harassed my first years with. When I walk around SIGGRAPH with him, he's been in the industry of visual effects and film for longer than I've been alive, possibly. And he's so generous with introducing me. I've shook the hands of so many Academy Award winners because of Burton just going, oh yeah, this person he's hugging because he went to high school with them or college with them or worked with them on some film. He's like, oh yeah, and over here is Rob. And it's like, hi, I like your movies. But that generosity of a mentor or somebody who's willing. So John Burton, not Tim Burton. To have that generosity and to have somebody who will give you that generosity is really nice, but you can't expect something of somebody. You can't go up to say, oh, so-and-so, please introduce me to so-and-so. That's a lot of pressure. But yeah, I think there's a common theme in a lot of what all of us are saying. And, I think Dave said it really well, of just being a human being, genuine and empathetic, and understanding that everyone's there and tired and anxious and has an agenda and is maybe scared to be the first one to talk. But I think the really important element of that is that there will be some people that are have bigger challenges than others to be that first person to speak, or have a greater reason to be afraid to even be there, or be cornered by somebody. And so watching out for your fellow human beings at these events and having their back can be a really important aspect of it as well.
This is actually a good time to bring up a really great point, because both jumping off of what Rob said and what I said earlier about not being like a super fan at these things, it actually goes the opposite way too, where you don't want to bad talk anyone and you don't want to bad talk companies. This is a big no-no that a lot of people just starting out who are coming into the industry as like gamers who haven't quite moved into the whole like developer side make this mistake very often. There's kind of a classic story that comes from Darius Kazemi, who wrote, who was really big in the industry a long time ago, and wrote a really good networking guide for GDC and such. He told a great story that I'm going to reiterate to you here, where he was talking to a fellow at a at GDC that he saw, and he casually mentioned John Romero. For the younger people in the audience, the famous game designer who created the game Doom, or worked on the game Doom, for example, and who's kind of a contentious figure. And the guy just was like, oh, John Romero? I hate that guy. And just started like launching into this tirade about how Daikatana sucked and all these other things about John Romero. And Darius was like, dude, he's standing right behind you. And like, the guy turned around, Darius was like, I don't remember what John Romero looked like, but like the guy's like face was just like dropped, right? You never know who is listening, and again, like, or who you're talking to, right? So whatever your feelings are about Blizzard and the latest Overwatch patch, or whatever those things, this is not the time to talk about it, because again, especially if you're looking for a job. So just please keep that in mind.
Yeah, and just remember the realities of game development, and that something sucks, there are probably reasons for that aren't that like a specific person's fault. So don't talk about how things suck.
Yeah, that's definitely that's worth reinforcing, in that you've got to get beyond the mindset of a consumer and complaining about something that you consumed that you didn't like. You've got to start thinking about if you all want to be professional game developers, then you're going to be facing the same tough choices that these developers have had to make to get something out. Just to publish anything is miraculous, I think, in so many ways, that to trash them because something is flawed in your eyes is that's not that empathy that you should be developing as people who are aspiring to become developers. And no, I think it becomes a signal to not take what you're going to be saying as a developer seriously if what you have is just sort of trash talking something that you're not on the inside of. And especially at a show like at GDC, you might be standing right next to somebody who is on the inside and will know exactly what you're getting wrong about that conversation. It's not that developers don't trash other developers. Humans are humans, but you better have some standing and some information to make that call that a bad choice was made versus just the only practical choice that was available to them. So yeah, it won't get you inside with anybody. Nobody's going to go, oh, I'm going to hire that person because they trashed that game that everybody else is trashing on social media. That will win you 0 points, if not negative. So no trashing.
I have some other notes that I need to go through for a second, but while I'm thinking about that, still keeping the topic open for networking tips or just other general like experience from shows and conferences, either having worked them or not. No, actually that made me say again, volunteering. So I volunteered for GDC for 10 years personally. Yeah, definitely like look and see for all these shows you can go to if there are volunteering opportunities to do it. Again, even consumer shows, if you want to join PAX as an enforcer, or I'm not sure what MagFest calls their group as well. You're going to meet so many people who are doing it because they want to be an active part of a community. I can tell you a lot of the folks who I volunteer with at GDC also do volunteering for PAX, and they do volunteering for MagFests. And again, these are not just like people just starting out, but these are people actually like in the industry currently working these shows as well. So these are great opportunities to put yourself out there. And also it's good resume fodder. These different shows are going to have different restrictions and different things for other people as well. GDC, for example, you have to do a 1,500 word essay about how you're going to be a great conference associate that year. As a volunteer, I do not have any tips for you on how to write that essay other than don't just post your resume. Ian does not share that information with us, which I think is a very deliberate thing because it's highly competitive. He gets like 10,000 applications and like 150 people make it in. So it's a very, very tight contest, but it is absolutely worth your time to apply to it because you get a free conference badge and also a huge, huge network of people opens up to you, which has been really good for me. And I think that same thing is true even for consumer shows as well, because the people who are volunteering are the ones who actively want to be there and wanting to be helping out.
I think you want to look for lots of different ways. I think the being a volunteer at a conference is it's a great way, especially as students. But it's really cool that you get veterans who are doing the same thing, and so what a great opportunity sort of to work with them as a volunteer at that show, and it's great networking. Opportunity not to network, but to become friends with somebody that you're working next to, standing, swiping badges and helping people out. But there are other ways of getting to shows, so GDC has lots of different associated things with it. There's the narrative game analysis contest that you can go for, and at Drexel, we often try to make it an assignment. And so you get classroom support and trying to put together that that approach, and that can get you a pass. It doesn't get you free travel there, but it can get you a pass into the event. Look for ways at your university that offer support. So Drexel has student research travel grants. If you're presenting at a conference, they can help reimburse you, depending on how far away it is, anywhere from a couple $100s to $500 to defer costs. Look for organizations like IGDA and the foundation. They have different ways to financially support people attending conferences, and usually they're going to be for special interest groups, whether they're culturally or otherwise focused. And there are other groups out there. This is where I find Twitter to be really useful, other than some of the horrific noise that happens on Twitter. A lot of people promote and advertise the different ways that they're trying to fund underrepresented people to get to these conferences. You just have to plan ahead, because oftentimes those announcements for those grants or funding go out 4 to 6 months before the event, sometimes even earlier, especially if there's a contest where there's judging that's happening. So you really have to sort of plan ahead. And talk to people who've done things like that before and find out what kind of calendar that they had to operate on, so that you're prepared timing wise to be competitive for something like that.
I was just going to address really quickly that in the chat, someone was asking who reviews all those applications for volunteering at GDC. His name is Ian McKenzie. You can look him up. It's a lot, though.
It's over 1,000.
Yeah. I definitely went significantly down because they don't take applications internationally anymore, unfortunately, due to laws in California. Yeah. So we have about a little less than 15 minutes to wrap up. So I'd still like to take Q&A from the audience if you have any from anything that we've said, but really quickly, we're going to work backwards from Phil to me. And I want to do basically the closing statements before we wrap up tonight. So yeah, take it away, Phil. Yes, I put you on the spot.
Yeah, I don't have any actual thoughts for like an overarching closing statement. The one thing that I also was just thinking about for making the most out of conferences is talk to other people who are going to go or who are there about like what they're trying to get out of it. If you go in isolation, like, okay, here's a set of like talks I want to see, here's a set of things I want to see, you might end up missing a lot of cool things that wouldn't have just inherently been on your radar. And by getting that feedback and input from other people, it can really help just like expand the experience and like really let you learn some new things that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Rob, you're next. And I think actually Phil brought up a good point that this is not just necessarily final thoughts, but anything that like we haven't said yet that you can think of that you think should be brought up before you wrap.
All the best jobs are gotten through networking. I think that's been a common thing that's been said for decades, if not generations, and I think it really holds true. I mentioned earlier that there's a local game company that's pretty much half Drexel grads, I think. Not quite, but a lot. Pretty high volume. And that pretty much only hire through networking. But even the stuff, to be like, I think Karen said, you want to be the person that they think of before they even post the ad. They already know you. But really be curious. Go and identify somebody that they're where you want to be. What do they talk about? What shows do they go to? They might be talking about shows that you never even heard of. GDC and E3 are huge, and the PAX series is large, but there's lots of other small ones. And so I would start small, get used to, break the ice with yourself of going out there and connecting with people. Do it small when there's not a lot at stake and not a lot of cost for you to do it, before you go in and go, this is it. I've spent $3,000 to be at GDC for a week, and if it doesn't work out, oh my God, So go start small, build up your muscles and your willingness. But also, maybe you get lucky and you get sent to GDC and you go, all right, it's my first show. I'll be curious. I'll be human. I'll be genuine. I'll be empathetic. I'll make the most of it and not be a Neanderthal.
Cool. And Dave, any final thoughts to share, or anything that we didn't bring up that you'd like to address?
Business, as in life, is about relationships. There is, I think, the single most important thing that I've done in the almost decade that we've been in business is to nurture the relationships with the partners that we have in person on a personal level. It's kind of an old business adage, that like there's no substitute for standing in a room with somebody and shaking their hands. And that's true in traditional business, but it's just as true in virtual businesses, in building games and apps that you distribute electronically. When it comes to relationships with other people in the industry, with business partners you might have, if you can see them, meet them in person, do it. And half of the reason that I go to conferences now, as opposed to meeting people and sort of expanding the community that I knew, half the reason I go to conferences now is to see old friends, to see old people that I've known for 8 years, 9 years, because we still have a business relationship. And it has led to opportunities that have significantly expanded our business at certain points in time. A relationship that I've kept alive for 7 years ends up turning into something that is significant for your business. So it's all about relationships, and it's all about genuinely nurturing them and really getting to know people.
Karen?
To kind of build on that a little bit, but also for the introverts out there, one thing that I found very valuable when I meet someone at a show and we have a good conversation and they give me their business card, if they have like their Twitter handle or some other social media contact, I will immediately start following them on Twitter. If I had a good experience with this person, I want to see what they're up to. So then I'll follow them on Twitter for a year. Then the next year I'll see them again and I'll know what they've been up to and we'll have stuff to talk about. And that's actually worked out really well a few times for me.
Very nice. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wow. I thought like maybe it'd be easier going last, but actually it's a lot harder because so many of the things I wanted to touch on got definitely touched on. For me, it just, but again, it always comes back to making friends. And when I say make friends, making genuine friends. They don't necessarily have to be the people who, you're going to be able to crash on their couch someday, although you can make those friends too, and those are great. But even like the smaller connections, as long as like people like you keep up with people, because I'm going to echo what Dave said. I go to GDC these days to catch up with folks that I only get to see once a year, both the friends I've made volunteering at the show as well as friends that I've made outside of the show as well. I have a pretty big network now in California, which is great. And yeah, even those like small connections that you might only see once a year, as long as they, you keep up to date with them and they know what you're about, like they will remember you when they have a need for something, or they know someone who has a need for something and you fill that hole. So keep making friendships and making those connections and making sure they're as genuine and, again, as up to date as possible is super essential. We have 5 minutes left. A question did cross on here, which Rob partially answered on the chat, asking what local shows we'd recommend for first timers. We mentioned Too Many Games is a great starter consumer show.
Especially if you're an indie developer.
Especially if you're an indie developer. They have a really good indie section that's been around for a while. It's all local devs from not just the Philadelphia area, but New York, Delaware. They all show at Too Many Games. Again, like talking to other people who are also developers is absolutely great. PAX Unplugged was mentioned, and if we haven't talked a lot about analog development, but GDC focuses on analog development too. And PAX Unplugged, which is the biggest tournament, one of the biggest tabletop conventions, obviously not level of Gen Con, but still pretty big, is in our backyard. And I think that's amazing. And you can talk to distributors there, you can talk to publishers there, and you can talk to other developers there. They have a great unpub section where you can see games that are already in development, and you can work with the developers on those games. PAX Unplugged is great. I cannot, again, stress enough, please come to IGDA meetings when we hold them, not just digitally on here, but also in person. Please go to Philly Game Mechanics. Not this Thursday, but next Thursday, they're going to be doing their Game Jam Showcase, where people have been working on games for 2 weeks for this 2-week stretch. And you can play those games. You can talk to people about those games. You can start making connections there and making those connections locally, which if you don't want to move might end up being super beneficial to you. So please go to those things. Don't just, go to the conferences, although do those too, because those are excellent. Keeping up with your local community, and there is a lot of it here in Philly, is super important to you.
One other group I wanted to just give a shout out to that I don't know if got much attention was Game Makers Guild in Philly, which is an organization of analog game developers that's thriving. That has playtesting sessions where people come in from all over. And that's one of the things cool about a lot of these organizations. It's not just Philly devs. A lot of times devs from like New York or like Maryland or just kind of like anywhere in the tri-state area will come in. So you'll end up getting nice like networking opportunities that aren't just local people without having the overhead of going to a full conference.
Yeah, if you do travel or you make it up to New York or some other place, before you travel, as part of your sort of planning for what your social agenda might be, see if there's a local IGDA chapter and if they've got a meeting during the time that you're going to be there, or reach out, on the IGDA Discord. They've got a channel for each local chapter. Not a lot of traffic happens on each of those individuals because they don't tend to make that a primary place, but you can try. And maybe you can go and meet a developer from another city while you're traveling. So all sorts of possibilities there.
One last thing that just popped into my head. When you go out to conferences, one of the great ways of being able to break the ice and find people that that you might be able to connect with easily is there's almost always somebody else from your city going to these conferences. And we've met people from Philly that we didn't know were going out there before, and you end up getting dinner together and talking and sharing each other's experiences. So if you ever if you're going out to a conference and you feel kind of alone, there's definitely going to be somebody else out there that is probably from around your neighborhood.
I want to echo the chat really quickly and also give a big shout out to Judy, who's joining us from North Carolina, former Philly area person who was able to make it because we did this online, which I think also goes to show that even webinars like this is still a great way to keep in touch with people. And you might just keep a lot of this advice we gave you and be able to do that with like people you meet at webinars as well.
Especially now.
Yeah, especially right now. We this whole time we didn't even mention, we briefly said GDC isn't even happening this year. We don't know when the next conference is going to be. This is a great time to review your portfolio, your business card, all of those things while we wait for the next big event. But also there's going to be more webinars like this happening, not just from us. So please keep an eye on that information as well. And other IGDA chapters are doing similar things too, so maybe you can check out ones from out of state. I will say New York City actually did an in-person event. They had their open office tonight, but I'm sure they're going to be doing online stuff as well. So
GDC is supposed to be broadcasting some stuff.
yeah,
right?
Friday they're going to post the schedule. So GDC is going to have a bunch of online stuff available the week that it was supposed to happen, and you're going to be able to see that schedule on their website Friday. So we'll try and post that information somewhere so you can see that as well.
Also, GDC Vault. There's a lot of free content on there now. There's a lot more now than there used to be. So if you can't make it to GDC and want to see some good talks, they have tons of them archived from years and years and years ago.
Yep, and all the content that they're posting this week is going to be posted on the Vault for free. So yeah, which is great. It is 9:30 now. I believe we are out of time. Rob? Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I've seen announcements from other major players that aren't going to be at GDC. I think Microsoft and Unity will also be streaming their stuff during the week. So there's going to be a lot of content out there to catch. But
yeah, absolutely. Cool. Thank you again to all the panelists. Big thanks to Dave. Thank you again so much for making out for this and all of your advice and information. It's been absolutely great. We again, second Tuesday, we'll have information about our April meeting as soon as possible. Who knows? It might be another webinar like this. We're not sure what's going to happen in the next couple of months. So please keep posted on our social media pages. Thank you for all for making out to this. I know this was a last minute thing too, but I think this format worked really well. Even if we start doing our meetings in person again next month, I'd love to keep doing webinars like this. I think it's a great format that is uniquely special. So yeah, thanks everyone.
And with that, I'll be ending the meeting. Good night, everybody. All right. Oh, and this is going to be recorded and it'll be online. We'll figure out how to share it later. But bye.